Russian President Vladimir Putin's approval rating soars to an astonishing 83%, all as the legacy media is admitting that Russia is winning. In this video, we're going to take a look at what I've been arguing for the last several weeks. We're going to see how the media is finally catching up to it. And stick with me to the very end of this video and I'll reveal where the world goes from here. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you. As always, I am your daily fake news antidote. So come on in to your Patriot Professor's Den, where I help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. If you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe. But before we begin, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video. That's our good friends over at Virtual Shield. I know many of you know them well. If you're not using a VPN or a virtual private network on your desktop, tablet, or mobile device while browsing the internet, then you really are exposing yourself to a lot of potential danger. But protecting yourself online simply has never been easier. And gang, to make it even better, our good friends over at Virtual Shield are offering our audience 50% off for life for all free trial signups. You heard that right. Half off for life. So don't wait. This is a limited time offer. Click on that link in the description below and sign up for a free 30-day trial to Virtual Shield VPN today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. Now, let me begin by reminding you all precisely what I've been saying from the very beginning of this Ukrainian crisis. I am your fake news antidote. I am your Patriot Professor who is here to help you to think better than the mainstream media does. I'm not here to blow smoke. I'm certainly not here to repeat the simpleton talking points coming from the legacy media. I'm here to help you to think better so that you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times so that you can make the right decisions for yourself and for your family. Now, as your Patriot Professor, as your fake news antidote, I got a lot of pushback when I came out and explained what many other analysts believed was the West's role in provoking Russia to act the way it did towards Ukraine. And I got a lot of pushback in my reporting on how Russia, along with China and India, were all indeed crushing the globalist order once and for all. Russia in particular has done more to shatter globalism than all the patriot movements in the West combined, including Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. And I certainly understand, given the sentiments of sympathy and support that have been forged, shall we say, towards Ukraine. Again, my commitment to you, however, is, as your fake news antidote, to keep pressing forward with the truth of the situation, as unpopular as that may be. That being said, I can now report that it does appear that the legacy media is starting to realize what's really happening here. They're starting to question their original assessment that they had of the invasion and the war of Putin himself and what his goals and aims are. And they're even starting to question the whole role of NATO and woke Western leaders in precipitating these horrible events that we've seen unfold over the last month. In other words, it took them long enough, but much of the legacy media is only now starting, and I underline starting, beginning to admit what we have been saying for the last 5 weeks. Now, I know it wasn't popular, but it was the truth. So let's start with the Wall Street Journal. To their shock, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that just over a month since the invasion, President Vladimir Putin's approval rating is the highest it has ever been. This is coming from data compiled by the independent polling firm called Levada Center. Right now, as we speak, Putin has an astonishing 83% approval rating. Now, interestingly, the last time his approval rating was that high was back in 2014, just after Russia had annexed Crimea. Now, the Journal is trying to account for this by pointing out that there's been a systematic crackdown on any dissent to the war in Ukraine, so Russian people can't hear of what's really happening on the ground, or they can't get differing opinions. But again, I think this is all just whistling past the graveyard on their part. This is an ironic refusal on the Journal's part to actually understand what's really happening here with Russia. Again, I'm glad to see that the legacy media is indeed starting to report that there were several geopolitical experts who predicted that NATO expansion eastward towards Russia would indeed lead to war. I mean, we could look back in 1990, NATO had a total of 17 nations as members. Today, it's 30. They've nearly doubled their membership. And that enlargement has happened entirely by incorporating Eastern European nations, the former Soviet satellites, into NATO. In 2007, in direct response to that eastward expansion, President Vladimir Putin spoke before the Munich Security Council and declared in no uncertain terms that Russia would never allow Ukraine to become a member of NATO. They considered that to be an existential threat to the survival of Russia as a nation, with NATO missiles on their border. And so this is why geopolitical experts like John Mearsheimer, the University of Chicago, Richard Kennan of Harvard, who was the architect of the post-World War II global containment policy against Russia, and even Henry Kissinger. They all believe that NATO eastward expansion would indeed eventually lead to war with Russia. But Western leaders, and as we know increasingly, woke leaders, were not deterred. They thought that the possibility of Ukrainian membership into NATO, which they promised to Ukraine in 2008 at the Bucharest conference, just a year after Putin warned NATO officials in that speech in Munich, Western leaders thought that Ukrainian NATO membership could be used as leverage against Russia to force Russia to be more hospitable to Western demands. But we're finding out today it was nothing less than a prodding tool that provoked the bear, and now that bear has been unleashed. And the Russian population is in full support of it. I mean, 83% support is about as unanimous as you can get in an approval rating poll. And then, after launching the invasion, Biden in Brussels, the U.S. and the EU, launched a blitzkrieg of sanctions against Russia, which included expelling 30% of Russian banks from the SWIFT financial transaction platform, which is the basic mechanism for economic globalization, and sanctioning Russia's central bank by freezing its foreign assets so that it couldn't buy up its own currency, the ruble, to protect it from deflation. It was perhaps the single most aggressive economic assault on a nation, a G20 nation to boot, in modern history. And yet, while the ruble was supposed to collapse under the weight of the sanctions, it didn't. It has largely recovered its losses. It's bounced back. Russia was supposed to suffer from runaway inflation. It hasn't. We are, but not Russia. And again, the legacy media is beginning to finally realize this. Look at this from the AP, this headline. Russia's ruble rebound raises questions of sanctions' impact. Oh, do you think so? And not only that, but now Russia is requiring all, quote, unfriendly nations, those nations that are currently sanctioning Russia, they are all now going to have to pay for Russian fuel and food exports in rubles, the Russian currency. So the very regimes that are sanctioning Russia's ruble will now be responsible, at least in part, for maintaining its worth. And Europe will have no choice, since it gets about 40% of its natural gas from Russia. That's why Russian oil and gas exports continue rather unabated as we speak. But of course, the $10,000 question is, why are the sanctions not working as intended? Why hasn't Russia's economy imploded? And slowly but surely, the legacy media, and certainly the financial class media, they're coming to the horrifying realization that Russia has preempted the effects of sanctions by effectively dislodging itself from the globalist world order. Now, that's exactly what I've been arguing since February 24th, since the breakout of this entire crisis. Russia has effectively emancipated itself from globalist economic and political structures in its own effort to become the very first post-globalist civilization state. A civilization state is a massive geographical region unified by a common culture that in effect constitutes a world within the world. It constitutes its own world, its own economy, its own culture, its own trade systems, its own currency, its own payment systems, its own IT networks, its own international rules, you name it. It's a world within a world that has fully emancipated itself from the post-World War II rules-based order that more and more populations are recognizing as really nothing more than Western imperialism. And that realization that Russia's deliberate intention to build itself up as the first post-globalist civilization state that by definition can no longer be touched by Western sanctions since it no longer relies on Western economic systems and networks, that realization is beginning to permeate the wider legacy media as well. And I was particularly struck that the media is increasingly beginning to question the saintliness of the Ukrainian forces. CNN, of all places, finally recognizing the neo-Nazi composition of the Azov battalion embedded in the Ukrainian army, which operates according to a full-blown fascist ideology. And to top it all off, they're even starting to realize that Russia is in fact winning this war and winning it handedly, particularly in the eastern Donbass region, which is precisely what Putin said he would do when he announced his so-called special military operation. So we're seeing the legacy media begin to realize that the woke arrogance of NATO leaders did indeed contribute to the Ukrainian crisis. The legacy media is realizing that all the Western sanctions against Russia are backfiring. The legacy media is admitting that Russia was well prepared to weather these sanctions by fortifying itself as a civilization state. The legacy media is admitting that this fortified Russia is indeed smashing globalization as we've known it. They're admitting that Ukrainian forces are indeed infused with neo-Nazi forces that make the demonstrators at Charlottesville look like choir boys by comparison. And they're even coming around to recognizing that Russia is indeed winning this war and winning it precisely the way they intended. Is it any wonder then that Putin's approval rating among Russians is soaring? Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video on the revenge of the red states as patriots are winning quite literally everywhere. You're going to absolutely love it. It's going to pump you up. So make sure to click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.